The sky was on fire. Smoke rose from the ground like dark fingers reaching for the heavens. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the air was heavy with the smell of burning metal and dust. A small squad of human soldiers lay low among the ruins of an alien city. Their armor scorched and their faces covered in dirt. They had been sent deep into enemy territory for a mission. But their transport had been shot down, leaving them stranded. There were only 7 of them now, tired, hungry, and unsure if they would live to see another day as they moved carefully through the shattered streets. A faint sound reached their ears. It was not gunfire, not machinery, but something softer crying. The soldiers froze. Exchanging glances, crying could mean a trap. The enemy was known to use decoys to lure in rescuers, but the sound continued, shaky and desperate. One soldier, Private Harris, moved forward to investigate. He stepped over broken stone and twisted metal. His weapon ready, behind a collapsed wall, he found her, an alien girl, young. Her skin pale blue with faint silver markings along her arms, her hair tangled and dusty, her clothes torn, her eyes were wide with fear. And she clutched her swollen stomach as if protecting something precious. Harris lowered his weapon slightly. Calling for the others, the rest of the squad approached, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. "Is she armed?" Sergeant Cole asked, his voice sharp. "No, but she's hurt," Harris replied. Noticing the way she winced when she moved, the alien girl tried to speak. But her words were in a language they didn't understand. Still, her tone carried fear, urgency, and something else pleading. Corporal Mason shook his head. "We can't take her with us. She's slowing us down already. We're barely surviving." Harris stepped in front of her protectively. "We can't leave her here. She won't survive 5 minutes on her own." The argument began. Half the squad wanted to help her. The other half thought it was too dangerous. While they spoke, the girl's eyes moved from face to face, lingering a moment longer on one soldier, Private Kane. Kane noticed and quickly looked away, his jaw tightening. She murmured something again, her voice trembling, and pointed weakly to her stomach. The squad's medic, Diaz, knelt beside her. "She's pregnant." "Not far from giving birth," he said quietly. The statement brought silence, heavy and uneasy. Sergeant Cole frowned. "This is not our problem. We're soldiers, not babysitters." Harris glared at him. "She's alive. That makes her our problem." In the end, Cole gave a short, frustrated nod. "Fine, but if she slows us down too much." "She's on her own." They gave her water, which she drank quickly, almost choking from thirst. Then they began moving again, sticking to the shadows, avoiding the open streets. The city was dangerous. Salient patrols moved constantly, scanning for survivors. Every step was taken carefully, every sound measured. The alien girl walked slowly, her bare feet scraping against the rubble. Harris stayed close to her, offering a steadying hand whenever she stumbled, but her eyes kept finding Kane again and again. And every time she looked at him, his face hardened just a little more. They reached an old building that seemed stable enough to hide in for the night. Inside, the air was cooler, but the silence felt heavy. The girl sat in a corner, sipping more water, her hands resting protectively on her belly. Harris tried to talk to her, using simple gestures, pointing at himself. Saying Harris, then pointing at her. She hesitated, then whispered a name. Soft and foreign, it didn't sound like any word the soldiers knew. But there was a warmth in her voice when she said it. Diaz checked her for injury, scratches, bruises, but no broken bones. "She's been running for a while," he said. "And not from just the war." Night fell quickly, and the sound of distant engines and alien voices drifted through the broken windows. The squad took turns keeping watch, but during Harris's shift, the girl stirred. She moved quietly to where Kane was sitting, watching the shadows. She knelt beside him and whispered something in her language. her hand gently touching his arm. Kane stiffened, his eyes flicking to Harris for a brief moment before looking away. Whatever she had said, it made his face pale. Harris noticed, but said nothing. A strange tension filled the room. The girl returned to her corner. Curling up to sleep, Kane stared at the floor, his hands gripping his rifle tightly. Outside, the war raged on. But inside that ruined building, another mystery had begun. Harris couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling them. Something about Kane and something about the child she carried. And somewhere deep in the night, as rain began to fall against the shattered walls, Harris realized this mission had just become far more complicated than survival. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the streets wet and shining under the pale light of the alien sun. The squad moved out before dawn, hoping to cover ground while enemy patrols were fewer. The alien girl walked in the middle of the group, Harris close beside her, Kane a few steps ahead. Every step was careful. The ground scattered with debris that could give away their position. Sergeant Cole kept his voice low, giving short orders. Stay in the shadows. Keep your heads down. The girl's breathing was slow but strained. Every so often she would stop and press a hand to her belly. Diaz, the medic, watched her closely, ready to step in if needed. The streets were not empty. They passed the burned-out shell of an alien transport, its metal twisted like paper. Smoke still rising from the wreck. From somewhere far away came the low hum of alien engines. Moving like predators through the city, a shadow flickered across the road ahead, and everyone froze. They crouched behind a fallen wall as two alien scouts passed by, tall and thin with armor that shimmered like water. The girl's hand shook, but Harris placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, keeping her. When the scouts were gone, they continued. Moving faster now, hours passed and the squad finally reached the edge of the city. Beyond lay a stretch of open wasteland, dangerous place with no cover. Cole studied the map on his wrist display, his brow furrowing. We'll need to cross this to reach the outpost, he said. But if we get spotted, we're dead. The alien girl looked out at the wasteland with wide, fearful eyes. Her gaze kept returning to Kane, who refused to meet her eyes. The wind picked up as they stepped onto the cracked ground, dust swirling around their boots. The heat rose quickly, making every breath feel heavy. Halfway across, the girl stumbled, falling to her knees. Harris rushed to her side, helping her up, but she was shaking, her face pale. We need to stop, Diaz said. She's dehydrated. Cole looked impatient, but gave the signal to rest. They took shelter in the shadow of a massive rock formation. Harris offered her water, which she drank greedily, coughing after each gulp. When she finished, she leaned back against the rock, closing her eyes. Suddenly, the faint sound of movement came from behind them. Mason raised his rifle. Scanning the horizon from the distance, shapes began to emerge low to the ground. Moving fast, alien creatures, their bodies long and segmented. With sharp mandibles clicking in hunger, the squad formed a defensive circle around the girl. Weapons ready, the creatures hissed, their movements quick and jerky. Cole gave the order, and gunfire erupted. Echoing across the wasteland, the smell of burned flesh filled the air as the creatures fell. But not all were dead. One lunged toward the girl, and Harris threw himself in front of her, blasting it at close range. The fight lasted less than a minute, but it left the squad breathing hard, sweat running down their faces. The girl clutched Harris's arm, whispering something urgent in her own language. Her eyes darted toward Kane again. Almost accusingly, Kane avoided her gaze, reloading his weapon with sharp, angry movements. After the attack, they moved on quickly, finally reaching the abandoned outpost by sunset. The structure was old and half collapsed, but it offered walls, a roof, and a chance to rest inside. They found dusty supply crates, most empty. But Diaz managed to dig out a few packets of rations. They ate in silence, the only sound the crunch of dried food and the soft hum of the alien girl's breathing. Harris tried to ask her where she came from, drawing pictures in the dirt mountains. Rivers, stars, she responded with her own drawings, pointing at a symbol that looked like a crescent moon over a jagged line. Cole watched, but said nothing, as darkness settled. Harris took first watch. Sitting near the door, the alien girl lay curled on the floor, her head resting on her arm, but in the middle of the night. She woke suddenly, her body tense. She whispered something in a trembling voice, pointing toward the door. Harris listened. And then he heard it to a faint crunch of boots on gravel. Enemy scouts, he shook Cole awake, and the squad quickly readied their weapons. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Cole signaled for silence, but just as the scouts passed the doorway, the girl gasped, clutching her stomach. The sound was small, but enough. The scouts turned their heads, their strange glowing eyes searching the darkness. A tense moment hung in the air before Kane fired the first shot. Gunfire roared in the night, the outpost filling with flashes of light and the sharp smell of plasma burns. When it was over, the scouts lay dead, but the noise would draw more. Cole gave the order to move out immediately as they packed. Harris noticed the girl's hand still on her stomach, her face pale with pain. He knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, but she only whispered one word, looking at Kane, and whatever that word meant, Kane's face told Harris it was something that would change everything. The night was colder than before. The squad had found temporary shelter inside the remains of a collapsed bunker. Its walls cracked and covered with strange alien fungus that glowed faintly in the dark. The glow was enough to see by, but it also made Harris uneasy because it meant they were easier to spot if anyone looked inside. The alien girl sat close to the far wall, her knees pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped around her stomach. She was quiet, but her eyes kept watching the soldiers, studying each one in turn. The tension in the squad was growing. Ever since she had whispered that word to Kane back at the outpost, Kane had been distant, avoiding everyone's gaze, especially hers. Harris had noticed, and so had Diaz, but neither spoke about it in front. Of the others, the air inside the bunker was damp and smelled faintly of rust and old blood. Cole ordered 2 men to stand guard at the narrow entrance, while the others rested. Harris sat near the girl. Trying again to speak to her, he pointed at himself, Harris, then at her. Raising an eyebrow, she hesitated, then whispered her name. Selah, the sound soft, almost musical. Harris repeated it, earning a small nod from her. He then tried to ask where she came from, drawing simple shapes in the dirt, a circle for a planet, a triangle for mountains. Selah watched, then leaned forward, drawing her own shapes, a crescent moon, a jagged line, and then a symbol that looked like the emblem of the human squad. Harris froze, staring at it. He pointed to the symbol, then to her stomach. She nodded slowly, her eyes flicking toward Kane again. Kane, sitting on the other side of the room, pretended not to notice. Cole's voice cut through the silence. "Whatever game you're playing, save it. We move at dawn." Harris ignored him, lowering his voice as he leaned closer to Selah. She began making more gestures, her hands moving as if she were telling a story. Harris could only catch pieces, but he understood enough. She had been with humans before, and not just recently. The realization made his heart race. Outside, the wind howled through the broken city, carrying with it the distant sound of vengeance. Everyone tensed, weapons ready, but the noise faded after a few minutes, leaving only the eerie drip of water from the bunker ceiling. When the squad finally began to settle, Selah moved quietly toward Kane. She crouched beside him, her voice Low, almost trembling, Harris couldn't hear the words. But he could see the way Kane's shoulders stiffened, his hands tightening around his rifle. She spoke for a long moment, then touched her belly gently. Kane's face was pale, his jaw clenched. He shook his head once, sharply. But Selah's eyes filled with tears. Harris felt the urge to step in, but before he could, Cole barked an order. For silence, reminding them all they were still in enemy territory. The squad fell quiet, though the tension remained like a shadow that refused to leave. A few hours later, Harris was on watch, sitting near the entrance of the bunker, listening. To the soft breathing of his squad, Selah wasn't asleep. She was watching him from the darkness. Her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the fungus, she crawled toward him slowly. Careful not to wake the others, when she reached him, she pointed at Kane, then at her stomach, and whispered a word again, the same one she had said before, Harris. Didn't understand the word, but the look in her eyes told him it was important. Before he could ask more, a faint scraping sound came from above. Harris froze, signaling her to stay still. Dust fell from the ceiling as something moved across the surface above them. He reached over and shook Cole awake, whispering urgently, "We've got company." The squad grabbed their weapons, positioning themselves around the entrance, a shadow passed over the opening, followed by the sharp clicking sound of alien armor plates shifting. The first enemy dropped down, landing in the middle of the bunker, its glowing eyes scanning the room. Gunfire exploded in the confined space, deafening. In its closeness, the smell of burned flesh filled the air as the alien fell. But more were coming, their voices echoing through the tunnels. Cole shouted for everyone to fall back to the rear exit. Harris grabbed Selah's hand, pulling her with him, Kane close behind. They ran through the narrow tunnels, the sound of pursuit never far behind. At one point, the passage narrowed so much that they had to move single file, Kane ending up directly behind Selah. She glanced back at him, her expression unreadable, before Harris urged her forward. Finally, they burst out into the open night. Gasping for air, the sky was a deep purple, dotted with alien stars. They didn't stop running until they reached the ruins of another building. Collapsing behind its crumbling walls, the danger was gone for now, but the mystery was deeper then. Ever Harris couldn't shake Selah's whispers from his mind, and the way Kane seemed almost haunted, somewhere hidden in their shared past. Was the truth about her and the child she carried? And Harris had the feeling that the truth would surface sooner than anyone expected. The morning was quiet, but it was not the peace of safety. It was the heavy silence that came before something bad. The squad moved through the narrow back streets of the ruined city. Every step crunching on broken glass and debris, Selah walked between Harris and Kane, her breathing slow, her hands protectively over her stomach. They had no real breakfast, just a few bites of dried ration. The water nearly gone. Cole's face was set in a grim line, his eyes scanning every shadow. But Harris noticed the tension wasn't just about the enemy anymore, it was about what was happening inside the squad. For the last 2 days, Selah's eyes had followed Kane, and Kane's refusal to meet her gaze was making everyone suspicious. Even Mason, who usually stayed quiet, kept glancing between them with narrowed eyes. By midday, the heat was rising, and they found shelter under the remains of a half-collapsed bridge. Cole called for a short rest, but the moment they stopped, the argument began. "We can't keep this up," Mason said, his voice sharp. "She's slowing us down. She's going to get us all killed." Harris stepped forward, his voice hard. "She's not a burden. She's a survivor, and she's under our protection." Mason scoffed. "You're thinking with your heart, not your head. We're soldiers, Harris, not rescuers." Selah flinched at the rising voices, her eyes darting nervously between them. Kane stayed silent, sitting off to the side, his rifle resting across his lap. Cole's patience finally snapped. Enough, both of you. We move in 5 minutes. But Mason wasn't done when Cole turned away. He moved toward Selah, grabbing her arm. "You're coming with me," he said coldly. "I'll leave you somewhere safe enough, and we can move faster without you." Selah struggled, her voice breaking as she cried out. Harris lunged forward, slamming Mason into the wall. The sound of their armor clashing echoing under the bridge. The 2 men grappled, fists swinging, boots scraping on the concrete. "Let her go." Harris roared, but Mason was just as strong, shoving him back. Cole stormed in, grabbing both of them and shoving them apart. "You two want to kill each other. Do it after we survive this mission." Selah pulled away from Mason, stumbling back. Into the safety of Harris's reach, her breathing was fast, her eyes wet with fear. Kane finally looked up, his jaw tight, but he still said nothing. The squad moved on, the tension now sharp enough to cut. That night, they found a ruined alien supply station, the roof partially intact, enough to give them shelter from the wind. They lit no fire, eating in silence. Selah stayed close to Harris, though her eyes kept drifting toward Kane in the dim light. When the others began to rest, Harris took first watch. Sitting near the entrance, the city was dark outside, the alien stars faint behind drifting smoke. After some time, Selah moved to sit beside him, her voice soft. "Harris," she said. Pronouncing his name slowly, he looked at her, surprised. "You know my name now." She gave a small nod, and pointed to her stomach, then toward Kane. Harris's brow furrowed. "You keep looking at him. Why?" She tried to explain, her words broken, but Harris could only understand pieces before. Mission, him. Child, before Harris could ask more. A faint metallic clink echoed from outside. He signaled for silence, but it was too late. A sudden burst of light flooded the entrance. An alien patrol. Cole shouted for defensive positions, the squad scattering to take cover. The aliens moved fast, their weapons glowing in the dark. Plasma fire lit the room in bright flashes, shadows dancing across the walls. Harris pulled Selah behind a stack of crates, firing over the top. Kane moved across the room, taking down 2 enemies with precise shots, his movements sharp and efficient. But Mason, instead of covering the squad, slipped toward the back of the room, dragging one of the supply crates with him. Harris saw it, anger rising. Mason was taking their remaining rations and trying to slip away in the chaos. Cole noticed too, his voice thundered over the gunfire. "Mason? Get back here." But Mason ignored him, disappearing into the shadows outside. The aliens began to fall back, leaving behind the smell of smoke and burned metal. When the fight was over, the squad was panting, their ammo lower, their food gone thanks to Mason. Cole's voice was low, but full of fury. "He's a traitor now, and if we see him again, he's not part of this squad." Selah sat against the wall, shaking, her eyes fixed not on Mason's escape route, but on Kane, and Kane, for the first time, looked back at her, his face pale and unreadable. Harris saw the silent exchange, and his stomach tightened with the weight of a truth he couldn't yet name. Somewhere in this mess of betrayal and danger, the truth about Selah's child was still waiting to be revealed, and it was pulling them all toward a breaking point. The wind began to howl before sunrise, carrying dust and the distant smell of burning fuel. Cole checked the horizon and cursed under his breath. Storm's coming, and it's not a small one. The sky was already turning a sickly yellow, clouds swirling unnaturally fast. They had no choice but to find shelter, and fast. The squad moved quickly through the broken streets, Selah struggling to keep up, Harris staying close to help. Kane stayed ahead, his rifle in hand, his eyes scanning for danger in the distance. They spotted the remains of a large alien transport ship, its hull torn open like the shell of a dead beast. Cole pointed toward it. "That's our cover. Move, The wind grew stronger, stinging their faces with sharp grains of sand. By the time they reached the wreck, the storm was almost on top of them. A wall of dust and wind swallowing the city behind them. They climbed inside through a jagged hole in the metal. The air heavy with the smell of rust and oil inside. It was dark except for thin rays of light leaking through cracks. The walls were covered in alien symbols, some glowing faintly. And pieces of broken machinery lay scattered on the floor. Cole ordered them to spread out and check the space, making sure no one else was inside. Harris guided Selah to a corner where the wind couldn't reach. She was breathing hard, one hand on her stomach, her other hand gripping his arm. "You okay?" he asked, but she only nodded faintly, her eyes drifting toward Kane, who was across the room checking a pile of debris. The storm hit full force. The wreck groaning under the pressure, dust seeping in through the cracks. They would be trapped here until it passed. The squad gathered near the center of the space. Trying to conserve their energy, the sound of the wind outside was deafening, like the roar of 1,000 beasts. In that dim, flickering light, Selah suddenly spoke, her voice quiet but clear. Here. The words were broken, but everyone understood them, her eyes fixed on Kane. Kane froze, his hands tightening around his rifle. Cole looked between them sharply. "What does she mean?" Harris leaned forward. "Selah, are you saying Kane is?" But before he could finish, a loud crash shook the wreck as part of the ceiling collapsed, sending metal shards clattering to the floor. The squad scrambled for cover, dust filling the air. Harris shielded Selah, pulling her close as pieces of metal fell around them. When the noise settled, the wreck groaned again, a reminder that the storm was still tearing at it from outside. Cole barked orders to check for injuries. Diaz patched a cut on Harris's arm while Kane sat silently in the corner. Avoiding Selah's gaze, the air inside was growing hotter. The smell of metal and sweat heavy. Selah shifted uncomfortably, pressing her back against the wall. Her breathing uneven, Harris knelt beside her. "What's wrong?" She pointed to her stomach again, then whispered something in her own language. Harris wished he could understand, but the look on her face was enough. It was pain. But not from injury, something else. Kane stood abruptly, walking to the other side of the wreck, pretending to inspect the walls. Cole followed him, his voice low but sharp. "If there's something you're not telling me, now's the time." Kane didn't answer, his jaw tight. The hours dragged on, the storm outside refusing to calm. The walls rattled, the sound of sand against metal like constant static. In the silence between gusts, Selah began to hum softly. A melody strange and haunting, it drew everyone's attention. Harris listened, realizing the tune seemed almost like a lullaby. Kane's head turned slightly at the sound, his eyes narrowing. Selah noticed, and her voice grew a little louder. Harris caught the way Kane's hands tightened into fists, his breathing changing. It was as if the song meant something only he understood. Finally, Kane muttered under his breath, "Stop," his voice shaking slightly. Selah stopped singing, her gaze locked on him. She whispered something in her language, and Kane's face paled. Harris's eyes moved between them. "What did she say to you?" Kane didn't answer. Cole stepped in, his patience gone. "I don't care what personal mess is going on here, but if it risks this squad, I will deal with it." No one spoke after that. The only sound, the endless roar of the storm. By the time the worst had passed, the wreck was filled with fine dust, coating their armor and skin. Cole signaled it was time to move, as they prepared to leave. Selah caught Harris's sleeve, leaning close. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Protect." "Child," Harris nodded, but when he glanced toward Kane, the man was already walking away, his expression unreadable. Harris didn't know the full truth yet, but he could feel it. Whatever Kane was hiding, it was going to change everything before this mission was over. The storm had passed, but the world outside was not calm. The air was heavy with dust, turning the light into a dull, lifeless glow. The squad moved cautiously through the ruins, stepping over jagged metal and cracked stone. Sayla walked between. Harris and Kane, her steps slow, her breathing heavy. They had only a little water left, and no food at all. Cole was pushing them hard, knowing they had to reach extraction before their strength gave out. The silence between Kane and Sayla was thick. Every time her eyes lingered on him, Kane's jaw tightened. Harris stayed close, watching both of them. Knowing something was building, by midday, they reached an open plaza. Once a marketplace, but now nothing more than broken stalls and blackened ground. The sound came first a low, mechanical hum. Then, from the far side of the plaza, alien soldiers emerge, their armor glinting in the pale light. Weapons raised, Cole gave the order, "Cover, now." The squad scattered, diving behind walls and debris as the first shots cracked through the air. Plasma bolts sizzled past Harris's head as he pulled Sayla behind a fallen beam. Kane took position on higher ground, firing with deadly precision. Each shot dropping an enemy soldier, but they kept coming, moving in coordinated lines. Pushing closer, Harris returned fire, the smell of burnt air filling his lungs. Then, a scream. Diaz was hit, falling back with smoke rising from his armor before anyone could reach him. An alien charged straight toward Sayla, its blade raised. Kane moved faster than Harris had ever seen, throwing himself in front of her. His rifle firing point blank, the alien fell. But not before its weapon slashed across Kane's side. He staggered, blood soaking through his armor. Sayla's eyes went wide, her voice breaking as she cried out something in her language. Harris grabbed Kane, pulling him behind cover. "Stay down." But Kane pushed his hand away. "I'm fine," he lied. Though his face was pale, the firefight raged on. Cole shouting orders, the squad holding the line. Finally, the last alien fell. Silence rushing in like a wave. Harris turned to Kane, kneeling beside him. "You're bleeding badly." Kane tried to wave him off, but Sayla was already there. Dropping to her knees beside him, her hands shook as she touched his face. Whispering words that seemed full of both anger and sorrow, Kane closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. Meeting her gaze, something passed between them. Something that made Harris feel like an outsider in his own squad. Cole came over, his voice sharp. "We don't have time for," but he stopped when Sayla suddenly took Kane's hand and pressed it to her stomach. Kane froze, his breath catching. Harris stared. "It's you, isn't it?" he said quietly. Kane didn't answer right away. His eyes locked on Sayla's. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Yes." The word hit like a shockwave. Cole's expression turned from confusion to fury. "You knew this the whole time. You endangered the mission." Kane's voice hardened. "It was before the mission, before any of this. We met during an old recon op. She was a guide. We got separated from my team for days. I didn't know I'd see her again." Sayla's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she spoke a single word, one that even Harris understood. "Father." Kane looked away, shame and regret mixing in his eyes. Harris wanted to speak, but Cole cut in. "We settle this later. Right now, we move." Diaz, wounded, but still on his feet, patched Kane's side as best as he could. They began walking again, the air tense with everything that had just been revealed. Harris stayed close to Sayla, glancing back at Kane. The man who had been so distant was now carrying a different weight, protecting her and their unborn child. The squad moved toward the edge of the ruined city, but Harris knew one thing for certain, now that the truth was out. The danger was even greater because the enemy wasn't the only threat anymore. The war, the survival, the betrayal, it was all tangled together. And the line between mission and family had just been crossed. The sun was sinking low, casting the ruined city in long shadows. The squad was close to the extraction point now. But every step felt heavier. Kane's injury had slowed him down. Though he refused help, Sayla stayed close to him, her hand brushing his arm every so often, as if afraid he might disappear if she didn't touch him. Harris watched from behind, ready to step in if Kane faltered. Cole kept his eyes on the map. His jaw tight. Another kilometer, and we're out of this nightmare. But nothing in war went smoothly. The faint hum of engines reached their ears, followed by the low, sharp click of alien armor plates. Harris's stomach sank. They're here. From the alleyways on both sides, alien soldiers emerged, cutting off their path. The squad moved into formation, rifles up. Sayla pulled behind cover. The aliens didn't rush. They spread out, forming a semicircle, confident they had trapped their prey. Cole shouted, "We break through to the east, no matter what." Gunfire erupted, the air filling with the sound of plasma bolts and the harsh smell of burning metal. Harris fired until his rifle overheated. Switching to his sidearm, Kane fought like a man possessed, each shot precise. His movements fueled by something deeper than duty. One alien charged toward Sayla, but Kane was faster. Stepping into its path and taking the hit meant for her. The blast knocked him down, blood pooling beneath him. Sayla screamed. Dropping to her knees beside him, Harris grabbed her, trying to pull her to safety, but she refused to let go of Kane's hand. The fight raged on around them, Cole shouting orders, the squad thinning the enemy line. Kane's breathing was ragged, his eyes locking on Sayla's. "You and the child." "Live," he said through clenched teeth. She shook her head, tears falling. "No? Not without you," he managed a faint smile. "You already have everything that matters." Then his gaze shifted to Harris. "Get her out of here." Harris's throat tightened. "We can still now," Kane barked, his voice cutting. Through the chaos, Cole gave the signal, and the squad surged forward. Harris pulling Sayla with him, Kane stayed where he was, covering their retreat with every last bit of strength. His rifle spat fire until the very end, his figure disappearing. In the haze of battle, the squad broke through the enemy line, running hard toward the extraction zone. Behind them, the sound of gunfire faded, replaced by the distant echo of the storm winds returning when they reached the clearing. The dropship was already waiting, its engines kicking up dust. Cole ordered everyone aboard, Harris lifting Sayla. Into the craft, she turned in the doorway, staring back at the ruined city, her lips moving silently. As if speaking to someone who could no longer hear, the ramp closed and the dropship lifted off. The city shrinking below them. Inside, the squad was silent. The weight of loss heavy on every face. Harris sat beside Sayla, her hands still pressed to her stomach. After a long moment, she looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "He is gone, but his blood lives." Harris nodded, "And I'll make sure that life is safe." Her eyes softened, a small, tired smile forming. The dropship broke through the clouds, leaving the war-torn world behind. But for Sayla, the war was not over. It had only changed. She had lost the man who had once been her protector, her connection to a different life, but she carried his child. A living piece of him, and Harris, though not the father, had silently taken the role of guardian as the stars stretched out before them. Sayla rested her head against the window, whispering Kane's name one last time. The future was uncertain. But one thing was clear, she would not face it alone.